Tina, and thank you so much to the College of Fine Arts and the Dean's Office for letting me come out from New York and share our work with you. It's always a pleasure to do this, but especially for this community where there's a deep interest, I think, in both art and health and science, and the intersection of those things. And one of the things I'm going to try to delineate today is places where we can find overlaps, convergence, even though we may then diverge to go back to our unique specialties. So you have an opportunity and a challenge as people who are part of an academic community to foster that conversation, foster communication between arts and science, between medicine and dance, and find ways where we can work with each other and create partnerships and collaboration. So that's between the lines. But I'm going to talk about a couple different points today, things that I hope will be of interest to your own practice, your own training, your own educational experience, or your own administrative experience for those of you who are in teaching administration here at the university. I don't want to rely too much on film to do my work, but I am going to show a brief kind of overview of the program, because the best way to understand what happens in the Dance for Parkinson's class is to see it happening. And since we can't have one here today, I thought I would show a brief clip, which is a segment from the PBS NewsHour about 4 years ago that tries to capture the essence of what happens in our program, and also gives you a chance to meet some of our fantastic participants who speak in their own words about what this program has meant for them. So I will be back in about 6 minutes, but first,
Next, a unique program that brings together dancers and people living with Parkinson's disease. Special correspondent David Iverson tells the story.
The Mark Morris Dance Center occupies a busy corner of Brooklyn. It's home to one of the best-known modern dance companies in the world, where the physical defines the art. But it's also home to a different group of dancers, where the physical defines a disease: Parkinson's.
Our society tells us again and again that there are people who can dance and there's everybody else who shouldn't even bother. And I think that's such a tragedy.
David Leventhal and John Higginbotham have performed lead roles in some of the Mark Morris Dance Company's signature works. But they also teach some of those same moves to people with Parkinson's, creating both a unique class and a special community. Mary Good was diagnosed with Parkinson's 2 years ago.
The world judges us by how we look. And Parkinson's, people with Parkinson's have really a look that people shy away from.
Is the class been a place where you're not judged?
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
It's one of those situations where everybody's in the same boat.
Class member Joy Esterberg has had Parkinson's for 7 years, but this class has given her something new.
It's given me a community that you don't have that in New York for the most part. This community is like being in a small town.
And contracting everything.
My impression is that many people with Parkinson's feel like they're outside of the human experience, and dance is a huge part of the human experience. And so to come in and dance, you're human again.
I want to welcome anybody who's...
At a meeting before the class begins, the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's are often apparent. A hand that shakes, muscles that stiffen.
Opening to the sides.
But when class starts, symptoms often seem to slip away.
Take a big dive forward and arc with your hand.
Class member Reggie Bunce.
When the dance class is going on, there are no patients. The dancers.
It's a phenomenon that neurologist Dr. Claire Hedgecliffe finds striking.
It's fascinating to see people who may have walked in slowly and sat down slowly and stood up slowly. And then when the music comes on, they really just get going.
Stop, 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 hey! But it's not just the music and motion that's helpful. With Parkinson's, everyday actions like stepping and reaching take greater focus and concentration, which is exactly what dance demands.
Feel the volume of the hands you go forward and the weight of it?
You have to learn complex series of steps, for example.
I'm starting out with my palms facing me, and I'm going to rotate my hands so my palm's now facing down.
There are pauses, there are turns, there are points where you go backwards, there are points where you mirror what your partner is doing. It has the physical component, but I think it also has the cognitive component.
In dance class, the mind and the body are constantly working together. You know, dancing is the ultimate mind-body connection.
And dance requires mind and imagination, focus and physicality. So does living with Parkinson's. It's grace that's hard won.
To be in control of your own movement and making it pleasing to yourself is a wonderful thing.
Toss the flower petals.
It's liberated a part of me, created a sense of freedom, a sense of creativity.
And swim.
Perhaps that's why this isn't a class people skip. Reggie Bucks is here just out of the hospital. His wife Bobby never misses either.
A bit of butterflies and birds and throwing flowers.
Pedal toss.
With dance, you soar.
As they leave your fingers.
It's really like bliss in a way, because there's no constraint. If it's physical and you extend your arm, you have an ideal sense of what an extended arm looks like. It doesn't look like this. But if you try to do it, and in your mind's eye, you're feeling it and doing it utterly to the extent that you can imagine it, then you're there.
And when you're there, Parkinson's isn't, at least not in the same way. Which is why Dance for Parkinson's, as it's officially known, is now stretching beyond its Brooklyn borders.
The best thing to plan around would be our regular Dance for PD class.
And David Leventhal, who this year won a New York Dance and Performance Award honoring his storied dance career, is leaving his performance life behind to devote all his time to Dance for Parkinson's.
Now I spend a lot of the week on conference calls, which is something I never imagined. We have classes right now in about 14 states, from California to Washington State to Texas, Houston, Texas, all the way down to Florida. There are 3 classes down there. And this class has given me a completely new and welcome understanding that movement is everybody's right. That we're all entitled to move, we're all entitled to dance in the most natural, free, joyous way.
And joy. It's not a quality you associate often with Parkinson's. And yet, it is what you see here. There are people in this class whose condition limits how they move, but not their smile or spirit.
We don't as yet know how to measure that objectively, and someone's sense of happiness, and how that affects their Parkinson's disease. We don't know how to measure joy or happiness, but we should try.
And if you could measure joy in this corner of Brooklyn, you would also find that what you give, you receive, and that every bit of it is shared.
I do want to say at the beginning that I will do my absolute best to leave substantial time for questions at the end. So feel free to jot stuff down and barrage me in about 40 minutes or so. So I wanted to give you a brief background. I know some of you are very familiar with Parkinson's, some of you are not. And even for those of you who are, I wanted to put Parkinson's really in the frame of the aging process, because many neurologists see Parkinson's as a window onto aging. Many of the symptoms that develop as a result of Parkinson's are really symptoms that develop with non-Parkinsonian aging as well. And in that way, both the challenges and responses to both of Parkinson's are applicable to people of all challenges, all conditions, and people experiencing healthy aging in general. In fact, some neurologists at Columbia told me that if we all lived to the age of 90, 50% of us would have the same amount of dopamine in our brains as somebody with Parkinson's 5 years in. So the process of dopamine loss, which I'll explain in a moment, is a process that we all experience after around age 40. And it's just a question that with Parkinson's, that loss accelerates and brings on some of those natural aging manifestations a little bit sooner. Parkinson's does strike people at all ages and all walks of life. Most Parkinson's is diagnosed in people in their 60s and early 70s, but about 10 to 15% of folks diagnosed with Parkinson's are diagnosed before the age of 50. And there's some, of course, famous cases, people that we recognize, Muhammad Ali and Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox was diagnosed in his early 30s. And so often we see Parkinson's striking people when they're at their prime of life. You know, they're professionally, they've reached a point where they are professionally very active and critical to whatever they're engaged in, critical in their family lives. So one of the dangers, of course, is that people run the risk of being permanently medicalized. What I mean by that is they kind of think of their symptoms as taking over their lives. And some of those symptoms are incredibly invasive. When we look at the main 4 symptoms of Parkinson's: tremor, resting tremor, slowness of movement, bradykinesia, as it's known, or akinesia, which is an absence of movement, the challenge of having to initiate that first step or initiating movement. Rigidity, tightness in the body, muscles tensing, finding it difficult to maintain fluidity through your movements, and balance impairment, postural instability. And altogether, these things can pose a significant limit on what people feel they're able to do. It makes it difficult for them to go out and about. It makes it difficult for many of them to perform their jobs in the way that they would like to. There's also a whole set of non-motor symptoms, things like depression, social exclusion, thing that people feel like they have trouble going out, they're awkward in social situations, so they stay home. Changes in their relationship, changes in autonomic nervous function, low blood pressure, things like that. People have sleeping issues with Parkinson's, so they're not sleeping well, they're tired a lot of the time. And this constellation of things, if people aren't careful, can in many ways take over their lives. And when we're looking at a chronic illness that can last 15, 20, 25, 30 years, we need to help people find a way to manage those symptoms and manage the quality of their life over a long span, particularly when people are diagnosed in their 30s and 40s. How do we help people maintain an identity that incorporates all of the things that they are, rather than simply transferring that identity to be one of a patient, a permanent patient? I think often people feel that they are tagged. In another film about the program, one man says, people used to see me and think there's Charlie Toby, and now they say there's Charlie Toby who is Parkinson's. So that Parkinson label becomes applied very, very quickly. This medicalization sort of permeates how people are treated when they come into the doctor's office that first time. There's a lot of emphasis, I think, on, or has been traditionally, a lot of emphasis on pharmacological intervention. The gold standard of Parkinson's treatment is L-Dopa, which replaces the dopamine that gets lost. In Parkinson's, part of the brain that produces dopamine, which is called the substantia nigra, has some kind of damage. We don't know what damages it, but the cells inside the substantia nigra, which is within the basal ganglia, start to die, and they produce, therefore, less less dopamine over time. When somebody is diagnosed with Parkinson's, they tend to have lost 50 to 70% of the cells already. So it's actually, there's a lot of cell death that happens before there are any signs. And that's one of the things that researchers are working on now, is to try to find some earlier markers to help people potentially prevent additional loss. If we can catch that sooner, we may be able to slow down the progression. Dopamine, of course, is responsible for many things, among them smooth motor control. And so what happens as there's less and less dopamine is movements become impaired, but there are a whole set of other things, as I talked about, that also are affected. What's not talked about, tends not to be talked about in that first visit, is one, the value of physical activity, although that is changing thanks to a lot of research on exercise. Two, strategies for how to move. So giving people with Parkinson's ways to think about movement so that they can get through their day, think about ways of engaging different qualities of movement, ways of thinking about musicality as a tool to help them move. And finally, the emphasis on quality of life. So Parkinson's medications do a lot, but they don't cover things like relationships and social interaction and the feeling that it's difficult to express yourself. One of the ways of thinking about Parkinson's, as Dave Iverson, who was the wonderful reporter in the segment, talks about, is that Parkinson's is a disease of subtraction. Things over time are taken away. And what can we put back in to somebody's life to maintain as much as we can a sense of quality of life? And that's not always addressed through pharmaceuticals. In fact, it's often rarely addressed through pharmaceuticals. So this is where dancers come in. And this is really the initial concept for the Dance for Parkinson's program. The thought is that dancers have a lot of information about movement. We have a lot of strategies that we use for movement. And all of the things that you see here are direct corollaries to what starts to go away with Parkinson's. So people with Parkinson's may have difficulty initiating movement. So much dance training is based on how we initiate, how we learn to trigger those movements with music, with imagery, with a story. Balance is a huge issue for folks with Parkinson's. They lose a sense of internal balance, and they also lose some of the quick reflexes that we need to catch our balance if we start to fall. Almost every dance style and technique that I know spends a lot of time helping its dancers maintain a sense of balance as people shift weight, as people turn, as people go backwards. So we naturally do that. Why not take that information and help people with Parkinson's use those tools for themselves? This is a whole 2 hours right here, but I'm going to skip to sequencing because it's a very important part of what dancers do. Dancers train to chain long phrases of movement together. Movement A, movement B, movement C, movement D, movement D, whatever you're doing, and we learn to then do that through repetition, through practice, right? Well, that skill, the ability to move from point A to point B to point C, becomes less and less automatic for folks with Parkinson's. Because again, the part of the brain that's responsible for automatic motion, the basal ganglia, is affected most. So to give people a way of thinking about movement as choreography, not as a random series of steps that they're trying to struggle through, is very convenient and useful. One man in Berkeley told me a story of feeling locked or frozen. People talk about being frozen in the grocery store. What that means is they're in an akinetic state. They have trouble initiating that first step. And he started to panic, as most people do when they feel that their feet are glued to the floor. So instead of thinking about trying to take a step, he thought about dancing to the cashier. He thought about how can I choreograph my way from here to there. And by going through that creative process, he was actually able to start to move because he was using a different part of his brain, and he was seeing it as a dance rather than as a challenge. So the concept really is very simple. Let's share our movement expertise with folks with Parkinson's. And I don't mean to say that dancers are the only ones who have this expertise. Physical therapists, occupational therapists have a lot of very useful information for folks with PD. But in a dance environment, we think about movement differently. We think about it a bit more creatively. We use music. We use a lot more imagery. And for many people, it's a way for them to find a detour around the motor limits that they might have. So traditionally, dance has not had a place at the table as much as some other movement forms. There's been a lot of focus, and for good reason, on exercise. There's been quite a bit of research on tandem bikes and treadmill fitness programs. And so dance has really been left out of that. When we look at traditional exercise programs, we see a few things that are highlighted. And these are critical for folks with Parkinson's: strength and stamina, flexibility, keeping a range of motion and amplitude in the body, postural stability. Many forms of exercise work on this very, very directly. And the studies that we've seen have shown that a high-impact regular fitness program for someone with Parkinson's can improve gait, tremor, and a lot of other measures, including balance. But you'll see a whole bunch of other stuff that is a little less addressed. Things like memory, or creativity, or aesthetics, or relationships. So there traditionally has been an emphasis on movement forms that are other than dance. So fitness forms, weightlifting, tai chi, boxing is now introduced, boxing for Parkinson's. But dance has been sort of left out. And one of the reasons for this is I kind of see dance as the little country of Luxembourg here. It's bordered on all sides by other forms that are more known and more recognized, and in some ways more researched and valued by traditional evidence-based methods. And dance touches on all of them, but has some unique characteristics and essential qualities that make it, in many ways, the perfect movement form for Parkinson's, even though it may not be the first thing on people's minds when they think about Parkinson's. I'm going to spend the next few minutes looking a bit more, drilling down into what makes dance so special for folks with Parkinson's, and in that, I'm hoping that you can also extrapolate this idea of dance for everyone, particularly an aging population. So it all goes back to a pirouette, at least our program does. On the left here, Hermann von Helmholtz, a great but not very well known now German physicist and doctor, who did a lot of work on visual perception in the brain. So one of the things he looked at was when we look at a point in the room and we change our focus quickly to another point in the room. You can try that for yourself. You tend to blur out all the stuff in between. Because if you actually take the time to scan, it would be an overwhelming amount of information. It's like trying to scan a full-color photograph on your $99 scanning machine, right? It takes a long time for all that information to go in. And it's the same in our brain. So we've trained ourselves neurologically to edit all that stuff out. And so we just see that points. Well, when Ole Westheimer, who's the founder of the Brooklyn Parkinson Group and the woman who came to us with this idea of a dance class, us being the Mark Marsh Dance Group, she had just had a conversation with her husband, who's a neurologist, about Dr. von Helmholtz. And Yvonne, her husband, was saying, well, this is, we know this principle, we see it all the time in patients. And Ole said, well, that's so interesting, because that's what happens when dancers turn. When dancers do a turn, we fix on a point, we see that point as long as we can, and then we spot our head around and see that point again. We don't see everything in between because we get incredibly dizzy, right? So I can't really turn this forward, but that's the problem. And that's exactly what von Helmholtz is talking about. And Ole had been thinking about the idea for a dance class for a while, but this was like the spark, because it made her say, you know what, I wonder what other strategies, what other neurological strategies we use as dancers that might be very helpful for people with Parkinson's. And so here's Ole on the left, dancing with Sam. So Ole came to us with this idea. And what she wanted was a double-edged sword. She said, I want a program that leverages these strategies that dancers use all the time in their training and in their performance. But I also want a program that has nothing to do with Parkinson's. Because people with Parkinson's spend a lot of their time thinking about and worrying about, being anxious about, and being surrounded by their symptoms and by the issues that arise in trying to manage their lives. And I want something outside of that. I want something outside of the clinical model. I want something outside of the therapy model, not because there's anything wrong with that, but I think people need a break. And I think that people need to get out and do something that's social and fun, that's not labeled as a Parkinson's activity. But the thing about dance is it also addresses so many of the things that folks start to subtract, or things, so many things that are subtracted from people's sense of possibility. So when she approached us, we had just opened the Mark Morris Dance Center. I don't want to talk a lot about bricks and mortar here, but it is important because what the building represents is a space that is about art and dance and creativity, not illness and not a clinical perspective on Parkinson's. And so I would say at least 50% of the transformation that happens is as soon as they come in the building, because people automatically feel that they are now part of a dance community and they're there to learn. They're there to engage as active dance students, not as patients. She also focused on the dance group because of a few things. One, Mark's commitment to the sense of group and community. Notice it's Mark Morris Dance Group, not Mark Morris Dance Company. His folk dance roots really informed his feelings about who should be dancing, which in his eyes is everybody. That we all dance together, we have danced together for thousands of years. And the continuation of that aesthetic is seen very strongly in his work, in which there's a real communal sense, a sense of dancing together. There are very few solos. It really is about the evocation of that perfect, that ideal community. Mark's work is also very gestural and musical, so it in many ways lends itself well to a community that's having trouble perhaps with expressing physically. There's very little that's sort of abstract in Mark's work. It's very much tied to lyrics, to word painting if there are words, to music painting if it's just music, and that sense of expressivity in the body is critical to his aesthetic. So that was part of it too, and of course the emphasis on music, which we'll talk about a bit later, is critical. What Oli wanted was not a modified movement experience for her group. She wanted a rigorous dance class taught by professional dancers and teachers. And that's what she got. So the three of us started. John, you know the film Misty Owens, some of you probably know. He's based in Dallas and was living in Brooklyn for 8 years while this program got started. She wanted us to focus on what we knew as dancers. And for the first year or two, she created a kind of blackout. She didn't want us to read a lot about Parkinson's. She didn't want us to go to conferences. She just wanted us to focus on the art and the craft of dancing and to create the program through feedback, through trial and error. So we would teach a class, and then the last 10, 15 minutes, we would talk with our group and ask them, so how did this work? Did you like this? What was frustrating? What didn't work? And after doing that for about 1.5 years, we started to accumulate a pretty substantial body of knowledge about what worked for this group. And of course, you think, well, everyone with Parkinson's is different, and it's absolutely true. If you have 27 people with Parkinson's in a room, you have 27 people with Parkinson's. There's no one model of Parkinson's. But we knew at least that we were listening to the needs and challenges of that particular community. And that model has really continued through this day. And the collaboration became known as Dance for PD. And it is a very active, still sustained collaboration between these two organizations. The dance group is responsible primarily for the artistic side, and EPG is responsible for participant recruitment, connecting with neurologists, and acting as a liaison. You know, if questions come up or concerns come up, they're able to translate that information back and forth. So why dancers? Why choose this particular group? I wanted to go a little bit deeper into sort of the essence of what it is that dance training does. Well, first is that dance is, in many ways, has elements of athletic pursuit in it. And so all those things we talked about before, strength, stamina, balance, flexibility, are automatically incorporated into any kind of dance training that you do. I really want to get that t-shirt. I'm going to have to send that slide into the picture. And dance, in this case, our group is doing a little tap technique exercise at the bar. Really works on developing these things. We all have heard stories of athletes who take dance class to enhance elements of their physical experience. So that's the first one. And that, we'll get that out of the way. Then all the other things, in my mind, are fairly unique to what we do as dancers, Mr. Balanchine. And the idea of mastering motor skills through conscious repetition is a critical part of what we do as dancers. And this is also a critical piece of what people with Parkinson's need to work on. As I said before, automatic movement becomes unreliable. So people have to relearn, sometimes every day, the processes of getting up from a chair, or walking across their living room, or getting into a car. So to be able to have a mode and a model for learning motor skills and replicating them and practicing them is incredibly useful. So this process of mastering skills through repetition, people say, well, people really master skills. Yes, they do. I often get asked, do people's symptoms improve as a result of this class? I can't answer that because I'm not a clinician. We need more research to answer that question. But what I do see is that people become better dancers as a result of this class. And this is a big piece of that. Just from a sort of learning standpoint, we tend to stop learning new motor skills quite early on in our lives, probably in our teenage years. Unless you take on a new job where you then have to practice a new skill, or a new iPhone comes out and you have to practice it, you learn that pretty quickly. But with dance, you are constantly learning and retraining motor skills and vocabulary. And so in many ways, it's a perfect form for people with Parkinson's because you have to learn something new every week, which is exactly what is mirrored in their daily lives. They have to learn or relearn movement patterns constantly. So for a condition that often robs people of physical expression, voice projection, and facial expression, the idea of being able to express meaning and narrative and emotion through their bodies and through their voices, we do voice work as well, is something that I think is critical in understanding what dance brings to the table, and is one of the parts that helps people actually access movement in the class that would otherwise be impossible for them. They're able to access it because they see it as a mode of expression, not as a physical therapy exercise. They see the function of it as being able to say something from inside their hearts or their minds, rather than simply a mechanical goal. And because of that, they're able to access the power of the imagination to help initiate movement. Music, as you know, in dance is used in a very different way than it might be if you're in the gym, where it just provides sort of a background beat. In a dance class, music certainly provides rhythm, but it also provides narrative, it provides emotional tone, it triggers memory, remember a certain song. It triggers a sense of structure, because if we know a song and we know how it goes, we know the roadmap that's ahead, and our brain understands that roadmap. We have the verse, we have the chorus, we have the melody. So I'm actually able to see the structure of the rhythm and the music ahead of me as I'm going into it from a movement perspective. And that, again, is very useful because people with Parkinson's often lose a sense of a roadmap as executive function is affected. This is a group in Orlando doing West Side Story. Here's a really important one. In our class, we certainly work on technique. We work on certain functional goals, and people do plie, tendu, and taradiddle, and tap. But we always do it through aesthetic goals. People are trying to achieve something aesthetic that informs their bodies about how to move. So for example, if we're doing, I use this example this morning in class, if we're doing Swan Lake, we'll think about the quality of that flapping rather than the range of motion that we're going. We're not going for heights. We're going to encourage people to move as big as they can. But what we're really going for is the quality of what it would be like to have wings. And what kind of softness do we need to have? What kind of awareness do we need to have in our joints? And all of that comes from the imagination. So here on the left, we see a picture from Mark Morris's piece called L'Allegro, Il Penseroso e il Moderato. It's a long title. And this is a section that focuses on the movement quality of birds. And that's Julie, the lead bird there, and she's being being hoisted over Peter's head. Well, you could see this simply as a physical or mechanical project in which he's just trying to get her up there. But really what they're trying to create is a sense of flight. And she's imagining that she's a bird, and he's imagining that he's the wind. And together, they create a beautiful visual aesthetic that the audience understands as a bird, the nightingale on flight. So if they both thought about the mechanics of it, that lift would be successful maybe half the time. But because they're thinking the aesthetics of it, it's successful every time because they are inside the movement and imagination. It's not just mechanics. And that's really what we're trying to get at through the use of imagery in the dance for PD class. Dancing together. Something we've been doing for thousands of years, probably the reason that dance and music have formed such a critical part of our society, is that we reinscribe community bonds through dancing together. And the left, again, from l'Allegro, that's represented through choreography. In the dance for PD class, it's a way for people to come together, to feel comfortable together, and to dance together. Somebody asked Oli a few weeks ago in a seminar, why is the dance class successful from a social perspective? Why do people come? She said, well, I think in dance class, people look at each other. And it was such a simple, clear answer, and I thought that's exactly what happens. People actually look at each other, they have to dance with each other, and because of that, they're getting this feedback that I'm present and I have value. And for people who often feel, as Mary said in the short film, who often feel that they don't fit in, or they feel awkward being seen or being out there, this class is a safe place for them to feel part of a community and to feel valued as part of that community. There's also, from a theoretical perspective, this idea of entrainment, that when we're dancing with other people doing the same thing, there's feedback that helps us maintain our rhythm and sense of movement and sense of gait as we go along, because we are surrounded by mirror images of what we ourselves are trying to do. It's a bit like thinking of an army marching over a bridge. Everybody is in exactly the same rhythm, and they get to that rhythm within a matter of milliseconds. It doesn't take 5 minutes for them to hear it and process it. We are naturally wired to entrain with others. Finally, the most critical, I think, in terms of cognitive element, is these three parts. One is sequencing, which I talked about a little bit earlier, the idea of having to learn not just, oops, I don't even think this is on, so you can all hear me, right? Yeah. Or do I need it for the video? No, okay. To think about not just the sequence of right, left, or open, shut, or up, down, but much more complicated movement. Horizontal, vertical, sagittal, circular, down, soft, sharp. So we have to understand all of those qualities in the process of learning movement. That's one piece. 2, mirroring, being able to follow somebody else who's doing movement across from us and being able to replicate it. We may have different goals in the class about how closely people replicate that movement. Sometimes they do it in their own way, they're interpreting their own way. But the process of being able to see movement, process it, and then have it come out of your own body is a very important part of the dance training experience and critical for these students especially. And number 3, remembering movement. People with Parkinson's often experience short-term memory. So to set up a model where people are both learning new material and also practicing material we know before sets up a really good system for people to start to challenge in a good way the memory that they have left, and to help people translate new material into material that eventually becomes familiar and may even become automatic. It's not that we're trying always to avoid automatic movement, we're actually trying to make some of the dance vocabulary become automatic. Dancers refer to this as muscle memory. But really what we're doing doesn't have anything to do with muscles, it has to do with what's happening in our basal ganglia. We're setting recognizable patterns in our brain that we can then bring up at a moment's notice. It's like leaving a tab open in your computer. It's like, oh, I know that one, I can do that easily. And so we weren't sure whether this would actually happen in an dance for PD class. But we noticed after doing the same sun salutation to open for a period of weeks and then changing it, that half of the group did the old version, even though we were demonstrating the new version. And what that meant for me was people had ingrained and embedded that movement phrase in their bodies. They had remembered it. They had learned it. We do all of this through many, many different types of exercises. We work on technique, ballet, modern, tap, jazz, flamenco, some ballroom, improvisation, mirroring and otherwise, narrative. We tell stories. We do narrative elements of martial arts repertoire. We did a whole, leading up to December, we do a whole unit on the Nutcracker. We call it the hard nut. And having people go through a movement synopsis of the first act, where they get to enact several different parts about the battle scene, Marie killing the Rat King, the party scene, so lots of different things. Rhythm, always focusing on rhythm. All of the movement that we do in class is driven by music, just as Mark's work is, and that's a huge part of it. Coordination, multitasking is one of the things that becomes more challenging with Parkinson's. So, and multitasking, of course, is something that dancers train to do every single day. It's the hardest part of dancing, probably. And so we work on it, we break things apart, we do things in separation, and then we slowly bring them together. And connection, figuring out ways that people in the class can communicate with each other, can express to each other, can guide each other. I think in trying to translate what we do to people who don't know a lot about dance, we're really trying to train our dancers to think like dancers. And in thinking like dancers, they are able to access a toolkit that dancers use for fluid, rhythmic, coordinated movement. And we hope that some of that translates into their own experience, both in the studio and outside. So this is just sort of a review of what we're talking about, this idea of repetition, right? Preparing, repeating, and going. Learning new things every time, and mastering things that we've been doing before. Using music and rhythm as a partner and as a guide. Thinking of planning movement. Again, executive function is something that's affected in Parkinson's. So we can think about a plan, a movement plan, from getting to get from point A to point B, and think of that as choreography rather than a struggle. People have an easier time. Harnessing the power of imagery. Again, thinking about how we do movement, the quality of that movement, not just the mechanics. Mechanics often create a barrier for people. It's that part of the mechanical movement that's automatic that is impaired. So if we think about an image or a story, we have people in our class have a much easier time of working their way around whatever that blockade is. And finally, social connections. Being able to connect with other people in class, not just as a way to feel valued as part of a community, but as a motivation to come back. One of the biggest challenges with Parkinson's folks is getting people to stick with a program and to do it year in and year out. Apathy is something that neurologists talk about all the time. And so it's a challenge for people to just get out of the house, to get clothes on, to get into the car, to come to class. But with something like dance, where there's enjoyment, there's music, there's creativity, and there's social connection, there's a way for them to relate, have relationships, and maintain those relationships over weeks and months and years. It's a huge incentive, and it's an important part of maintaining what we call adherence to the program. What we see through many of our participants is this process of transformation and empowerment. This idea that through dance, people transform their sense of themselves. They have feeling that they are not alone. They have a feeling that they are not patients, but they're dancers. They're part, as Reggie said. For that hour quarter of feeling that you're learning something new, feeling that you're part of an artistic community, you start to transform how you think about yourself and become more empowered to do other things, which I'll talk about in a moment. So going back to this list, I say why not have it all? And that's really what dance can bring to the table. It's a long list, and I think many of these things are obvious. One that we talked about this morning that I'll emphasize again is confidence. Because when we're looking at something that for many people is a brand new activity, right? Many people come into this class never having danced before, related to Parkinson's or not, they start to do new movements. They start to move in ways that they've never moved before. They start to use music in a way that they've never done before. They start to develop a greater sense of confidence in what they can do and potentially in what they can do in the future. We've had people tell us this translates into being able to do more things in class, but also being home and actually having what they do in class affect their confidence in activities of daily living. Right? They're able to do things like reach for something on a shelf, or play with their grandkids, or dance at a wedding because they've been practicing in class. So what I would argue for is that dance has a big place at this table of complementary and essential, and complementary sounds like it's optional, but essential activities for folks who are living with Parkinson's. And one of the challenges we've had is measuring the impact of this work. And I wanted to touch on this because you're all here at a university where there's so much emphasis on evidence, on proving what you do, on backing up what you say, and I think that's critical. So I wanted to talk a little bit about impact and show you some different ways that we measure impact in the program, or different ways that we try to look at how the program has had an impact. The first is very clearly in motor skills, and there's been some preliminary work, some preliminary studies, small cohorts, not controlled or randomized, but still. There have been some studies that have looked at changes in motor skills as a result of a Dance for Parkinson's class. This one was done in Freiburg in Germany, at the Neurological Institute there, and it used the very standard measurement for Parkinson's. This is the UPDRS, which is the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. And it's a series of tests that look at various aspects of motor control. Things like rigidity, hand movements, finger taps, gait. And you can see the before and afters in red. For the UPDRS scores, the lower score is better, so you can see improvement in several areas. And neurologists really like this chart. So they say, well, we see the effects on the UPDRS, there must be something happening. I'm more inclined to look at a mixed method study because I'm very interested in the quality of life issues that people deal with, because that is what I hear participants talk about every day when you come in. I'm having trouble with this in my life, or I'm feeling depressed, or Parkinson's is affecting this aspect of my existence. And a lot of the things don't have to do with motor skills. So to look at how the class affects people in their daily lives, we have to use other things like journaling and interviews and videos and some quality of life, validated quality of life measures. And this research paper, which was done at Roehampton University just outside of London, used several different measures, including, remarkably, video observation and analysis. The researcher actually videoed each person in class over 12 weeks and then followed that person's movement through the course of the study, and saw some pretty significant changes over time. Another way of measuring impact is to look at how this class spawns or sparks interest in other activities. So we've seen in Brooklyn, in Berkeley, and in many other communities, that dance class is the first thing, and it serves as a catalyst for other types of engagement: singing classes, theater classes, art projects, support groups. In some cases, the dance class preceded the support group. And I think the reason for that is that dance has a way of bringing people together and breaking down barriers in a way that other activities don't. So if you dance together, you can do pretty much everything else together. I want to take a quick tangent here and talk about arts engagement in general, because overall, the trend, we see fewer and fewer people attending arts events as audience members. This is from a little old now, 2003, 2008. But we see a pretty predictable drop there in attendance. This is attendance at symphony, dance, opera, and theater over a period of 5 years. And this trend, unfortunately, has continued. But when we look at engagement in all areas, this means people who participate in arts, people who take classes, people who watch art-based media at home, people who create their own. We see a much higher rate, 74% of people are actually engaged in the US, are engaged in some kind of artistic endeavor. And this is really what our program is about. It's not so much about people, I think traditionally, dance companies saw outreach or engagement to adults as being predominantly a performative process, where here's a show, we'll give you tickets, come see the show, maybe there will be a Q&A afterwards. There's such a huge demand for people actually to participate and engage in the creative and experiential side of the arts, we saw from that previous slide, and this is really what we're trying to leverage. And I think it's one reason behind the program's success, that people really feel that they're part of something that they can do. They're not just there to watch someone else do it. So this is the program in 2008. And we jump to now, we see a huge expansion. Wherever this program developed, and it's developed in many different places with very different dance cultures, the movement vocabulary changes, but the approach and philosophy are exactly the same. So the classes in Pune, India, are not ballet and modern, they're Kathak and Bollywood. But the principle, the approach, the core template for what they do is identical. Another way of measuring impact is looking at organizational effects. And this is a little bit harder to study. In fact, there hasn't been a study done on it, but we know anecdotally that this program has had a way of letting organizations think differently about how they operate. So many of these organizations, again, had no form of engagement with adults. They often had youth programs. They had programs for people who wanted to be dancers professionally. And what Dance for Parkinson's has done is to introduce the idea of service to a different type of community, and service to adults and elder adults in the community. It's also created collaborative partnerships between arts organizations and health and medical organizations, and scientific organizations as well, in ways that in several communities, those entities, those institutions had no way of talking to each other before. There's no way for a ballet company to reach out to a neurological center. And this program has given them a common vocabulary. Even if they speak slightly different languages, there's still an understanding that we have something that we can do together. The dancers have something to offer their community, the medical center or the neurology office has something they can offer in their community that they otherwise couldn't. And that's where these wonderful partnerships start to form. Those are also critical when we're looking at research, because most dance organizations are not poised to do any kind of research on what they're doing. We actually need to rely on a university, a lab, or medical organization to do that research on our behalf. And I wanted to highlight one example. It doesn't only go one way in terms of having a sort of broader health application of dance within a dance center, but it's also starting to influence the ways that medical centers are thinking about their programming. This is a picture of the new neuroscience building at Stanford University, California. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Stanford. Very strong interest in STEM, and science, technology, engineering, math, and a very well-regarded and medical school. This is a new building, which will be finished next year. And inside of this building is a dance studio, because the director of the Movement Disorder Center is a former dancer. Before she went back to medical school, she danced professionally in the UK, and so has both a sort of emotional and scientific interest in bringing dance into her center. This is incidentally going to be called, among other things, the Balance Center. So dance is actually coming into the medical world in a real way. So I'm going to change gears here for the last few minutes and talk a little bit about impact on individuals outside of class. talked a lot about changes that we see in people in class, but what about outside? And we started to do our own evaluations. So you can see that the first one here, the question is, class improves motor symptoms. A very general question, but we see that about almost 73% of people agree pretty strongly that class does improve their motor symptoms. What was most interesting for us is these second two. I perform at least one activity of daily living with more ease because of this class. 66%. That was shocking to us, that people were actually applying, even though we talked about it theoretically, people were actually able to apply what we do in class to their life, their quality of life outside of the studio. And the third one, we asked a whole series of questions about using specific elements of the class, like imagery or things that the teacher said as coaching notes. This one is about integrating music and rhythm more in their everyday life because of the class. And that's a little over 70% of people actually find that they're using that as a tool. So this got us thinking, because people with Parkinson's spend most of their time in their homes and in their daily lives. They spend very little time, we hope, in hospitals. Hospitalization really only occurs if people fall, if people are getting surgery, or if they're going to the hospital for the regular checkup, which happens 2 to 4 times a year for most people. So it's very much an outpatient disease, and people spend a huge amount of time having to cope by themselves. So we thought about, how do we translate in an easy way what happens in the class to somebody who's out on the street or in their living room or getting off a bus. And we saw an opportunity to use Google Glass, which is a technology that's been pretty denigrated recently. And in fact, the product was pulled from the market because Google realized they need to do a lot more work on it before releasing it again to the public. However, in its medical and technical applications, Google is still supporting and encouraging its use in things like surgery, diagnostics, hazardous materials handling, things like that. Things where you really need your hands and you need to be able to refer to something using voice-activated portable technology. So we started working with a creative agency in New York called SS&K on developing an app for people with Parkinson's that would integrate dance as a much more practical tool out on the street. And this is a trend. There are a lot of organizations that are working on apps and various wearable technologies, but almost all of them are focused on diagnostics, helping the person with Parkinson's and the doctor translate what's happening in real time to a medical record. So they can test somebody's tremor, they can actually test their balance, because most phones have accelerometers in them, and they can actually figure out what someone's physicality is like. They can test medication schedules by having people self-report when they take pills and look at some of the effects. So there's a lot of work on that. This particular project came out of a contest, a grant that Google put forward for nonprofits to submit a plan for using Glass as a practical tool, not as a diagnostic tool, but as something that people could use in their daily lives. And a couple things going for it. One was this idea that it's pretty amazing technology, even if it has a lot of issues in terms of programming and bugs, it is quite incredible in how it brings an image sort of very close to your body. You don't have to refer to something down, it is right there in your sight line. 2, it's wearable, so for folks who are in wheelchairs or who are using walkers, you don't have to try to find something to help you. It's maybe on your head and you slide it down. It's portable and private. Nobody else sees the images that you see. So nobody knows if you're watching something or not, which is incidentally one of the things that people found so creepy about. And number 4, verbal and tactile input. So you can use your hands, or if your tremor is really bad, you can simply initiate things using your voice. This slide is supposed to simulate sort of what you see if you're wearing Google Glass. So you see in your right eye a little rectangle of a video screen. And we developed 4 parts of this. One is a warm-up using Mark Morris repertoire. The second is a series of short balance exercises, also using the rep. There's Walk With Me, which I'll show you an example of, and there's Unfreeze Me. So if somebody starts to feel they're frozen, they can simply say, "Okay, Glass, unfreeze me." And it'll show a dancer starting to shift weight back and forth, which is one of the first things that we do when we start to see someone in class freeze is really creating a model for how to start to shift weight back and forth with music. So here's the main menu, say OK glass, and then it brings you to these 4 options. We try to keep the navigation very, very simple. There's a countdown. Let's see if I can actually get this to work. There's a countdown clock so that there's no shock along the way. It's kind of like the beginning of a movie, right? It gives you preparation. And then here's a brief example of one of the warm-ups. And again, this is actually a very rough test version. That's why this background up in the morning who haven't even made it out of bed, they can reach for their glass, they can say, warm me up, and on the edge of the bed, they can start doing some gentle We really just want to be people's brains all the time. The last part was really taken from the end of class when we're going across the floor. And we found that once you put on music and create a very strong sense of rhythm and a model for how to move, people who have akinesia or bradykinesia are able to move at a pretty good clip going across the floor. So we thought, well, let's create something that will help people maintain a steady gait over time. So the last module was walk with me, and we just shot this on Thursday. I thought I'd show you kind of what this looks like. It's not quite safe. So our Parkinson's group thought this would be somebody's most useful thing, because again, you're able to follow somebody in your screen and set that gait as we go. So, one of our Joy, you recognize from the film, wearing her Google Glass and trying out some moves. The other thing that we've tried to do is give our participants a chance to perform. And in measuring impact, yes, I fully support and want to foster clinical research studies about this program. But honestly, for me, seeing people go through the process of rehearsal and performance was better than that. Because we really saw people engaging in the work over a period of 14, 15 months, the same material getting better and better and better. And more importantly, to me, really understanding the sense of community that they were working on this project together. The sense of ownership, the sense of transferring material from the dancers who were teaching it to them to be their own thing, to be something that they owned and had control of, was a critical part of this. And happens a little bit in class, but it really happened in this project where people had time to work on something again and again. So, in summary, I wanted to emphasize a few key points. One is that in a dance studio, the rules change. The way that people think about themselves as patients transforms into people thinking of themselves as dancers, as lifelong learners, as experimenters. And a lot of the roles that they might have in other areas of their existence as patients change here. They can dance with anyone, they can do what they want to do, they can explore movement in ways that might not be open to them otherwise. The experience throughout is demedicalized. We don't talk about symptoms in the class. We don't address them head on because we know that now you know that all the things that dancers work on in their technical training are directly applicable to symptoms. And so we don't have to change the art form to make it relevant and beneficial to this population. We're not there to fix a problem, as you might start a therapy session saying, well, what's wrong? What can we do to help? We start saying, let's dance today. What are we going to experience today? What are some things that we can learn dance-wise that are going to be enjoyable and stimulating and challenging? And that immediately changes people's mindsets about being there. Oh, I don't have a problem. I'm here to learn. We have people of all abilities and levels of mobility in the class, and we're really focused on helping people understand what is still possible for them. Because in other areas of their lives, people are often told, you can't do this, or you're going to have trouble doing this, don't do this, stay away from this. As recently as 20 years ago, exercise itself was counterindicated for Parkinson's. People were told not to do any kind of physical activity because it might result in a fall. And we're very much about trying to explore safely what's still possible. Everyone contributes. People with Parkinson's, care partners, spouses, partners, friends. So 3 transformations to finish with. Patients becoming dancers, at least in their sense of identity, whether that's for an hour a week or a few hours or through the whole year. It's a critical change. Number 2, dancers becoming more engaged and valued by others, valued contributors to the community. How can we as dancers serve people around us? We do that certainly through performance, by bringing energy and light and inspiration through performance. But how can we do it through teaching? How can we bridge that gap between the performance side of what we do, using all those skills in a different mode as a way to help people manage significant health concerns? And number 3, institutions deepening their mission, understanding a different way of thinking about how to serve their communities, extending their reach, and as we saw with all of those institutions, fostering new partnerships. Dance companies working with medical schools, dance studios working with neurologists. I always like to finish with this picture. This is a photograph of people in Oakland, California, taking a bow after a performance. And for me, I always keep this in my mind because it represents the ideal of what dance can bring to people of all ages, but specifically this community. The sense of pride, the sense of connection, the sense of achievement, the sense of grace that I see in this photo is something that I hope we can all carry with us and think about as a model for how the arts can start to influence healthcare choices, can influence funding choices, can influence partnership choices going forward. I'm going to end on an emotional note. I want to show you a very short 3-minute clip from a film called Capturing Race, which is a documentary that Dave Iverson, the same reporter who did the PBS segment, did about our group. And I want to show this to you because it's not at all about our specific program. It's about one person, Cindy, and her experience with dance in general. I'll finish with this.
I've learned to value myself more, which is quite a gift. When I'm shrunk and I say to myself, I'm a dancer. I have to say that's true. I'm a dancer. And it gives me motivation to take better care of myself. When the medicine is working, I can almost do everything. It's just that the amount of time gets shorter and shorter when it functions. Parkinson's forces you to reveal your vulnerabilities. You know, otherwise people mostly try to put on their best face, their best appearance. You know, I'm going out in public, I have to put on this and that, and I have to put my overcoat, button it up tight. Well, you can't, if you're going with Parkinson's and you can't button it, you're revealed, you know, there's no way about it. What happens to me when my feet feel like glue and they're stuck on the floor? I sometimes cannot walk, but I can dance. If I can, I don't know, give you an example. Should I start?
Yeah.
Well, for example, right now I'm walking, you can see my hand is shaking with the tremor. And if I try to walk, I have a great deal of difficulty. I can walk a little bit, but if I pretend I'm dancing, I can go. I don't have any problems. The music leads. In other words, it's not my brain telling me to take a step or to do this or do that. The music is leading me. So I'm like following this wonderful leader who's so mysterious and has such a lovely sound, and it's going to take me to some other place.
What is that other place?
Well, excuse me. It's a place where you're weightless. You know, you just your body is just flies. It doesn't tug you and pull you and push you and have you and these knots where you can't move and you can't think and you're struggling and fighting and just you go above that.
Yeah, I wanted to give you some time to ask questions or make comments. Happy to answer and or to listen. So, yes.
So at the end of your presentation, you did talk a little bit about how you're planning to kind of extend your reach. And I wanted to know about, you did discuss the locations as well, and I wanted to know more about the accessibility of dancer PD to Parkinson's patients and maybe like more low income areas and things like that. Like how do you reach those people? Because I feel like if you want everyone to dance together, then
Absolutely. Yeah, it really depends on the community. So in New York, it's fairly easy to get around. I would say the class with the greatest economic range is Brooklyn and perhaps the Bronx. Because again, both of those boroughs have a very wide income disparity, but we see people of all levels coming into the class. The places where it's more of a concern are the places where there's a dance studio which tends to be a more affluent part of town. How do we get people to that community? And we have tried a number of communities, particularly in the Bay Area, California, to have those teachers reach out to other parts of the city where there aren't those studios, and either to bring people in or to do engagement classes in a community center, senior center, even a hospital, if that's necessary. So it's something we're aware of, but it's an ongoing challenge. In fact, one of the things we have to think about as administrators and as dancers is how do we reach people who may not be able to access the places where arts and culture are happening. In Brooklyn, we are working very closely with community groups in an area called Brownsville. Is there Brownsville, Texas? Yes. Yeah. So Brownsville, Brooklyn is a lot of economic challenges. It's an economically disadvantaged area, and there are not a lot of resources, health, cultural, artistic in general. So we're working to create really a model of the programming that we do at our Fort Greene Dance Studio there in Brownsville. So there would be a dance graffiti class, there would be classes for youth, and also we have a program for people in New York City housing who come and do dance classes. So all of that will be replicated within the Brownsville Center, which we hope will actually be funded by the city. So that's happening to a little extent. But by and large, we see these classes happening where people have more economic needs than not all the time, but it's an ongoing challenge, and I'm glad you raised it. What were the suggestions too? And
what is the certification process look like for dancers hoping to be instructors?
great question. So we offer several levels of training. The first is an introductory workshop for people who are trained dancers and have some teaching experience. That's 2 to 3 days. Then we really want them to go out into the field and to start a class, supervised and in collaboration with either a medical team or a senior teacher, somebody who's already been doing this or has a lot of teaching experience. And then the next step is a professional development workshop to build on that initial training. The certification can happen if and when people have met the general qualifications, which is 3 to 5 years of teaching experience of anything, not simply dance or PD, professional dance training, but also have taught a dance for Parkinson's class for at least 50 hours and have done both workshops. So once that happens, the certification is sort of modeled after a graduate level or 2 graduate level seminars. So there's coursework, there's video submission, there's reading, there's some experiential work where people actually go and take dance class in a technique they've never taken before and journal about that. So they're experiencing something new and talking about what that experience is like, and then doing a capstone interview. So, and there's more information online. If you are interested in certification or training, there's more information on the website, or you can talk to me after. Yes?
I'm sure other groups that represent people with other conditions, autoimmune or neurological conditions, reach out to you. How have you all responded to that?
It's a great question. In general, we're very open to people with all kinds of challenges coming to class, and they are welcome to come to class. The class is pitched to and promoted for people with Parkinson's, so that label stays. But we do welcome anybody. We've had a number of people with different challenges, from Huntington's to stroke, to partial paralysis, ataxia, who come in. I think, and I'm putting this out there as a instigation for all of you, I think there's a huge niche or set of niches that need to be filled for people with other conditions. I mean, there's no dance for MS program, and yet there's hundreds of thousands of people living with MS in this country, and yet there's nothing offered. So those dancers out there who are interested in serving and want to do something like this, there are many groups that are not, whose needs and requests are not being met. We just don't have the resources to do that in an official way, but we welcome people to come and take our class, and many classes in the network also welcome and accept people with other neurological conditions. One of the challenges that we've seen is we often get requests from people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and we're open to that, but some of the groups are not. That decision is made by the Parkinson's participants themselves. Part of that has to do with what they want to focus on in class, and people with dementia and Alzheimer's, not necessarily the same thing, but certainly overlap, have different needs that need to be addressed. And I think in a group that started as a Parkinson's class, they want to protect whatever the structure and integrity of that is, and maybe have a separate class for folks who are dealing with memory issues. So that's the only place where we've had a little bit of, I've had some tension with other groups, because I get a call and I say, well, will you let this person in? And they say, well, we're not sure, we like our Parkinson's. The other thing is there is a certain amount of bonding that happens in the class. People are all kind of experiencing the same condition, and there is that does have significance and importance, and I don't want to break that up. So it's a case-by-case basis and also a class-by-class basis of individual groups. But there's a huge need out there. So all of you who are training to teach, the door is wide open. And not to mention even just healthy elderly. I mean, I can't tell you how many times somebody in the audience has said, well, I'm 76, I don't have Parkinson's, but I really want to do that. Yes, I understand. Yeah.
Going off of like the skills list that you have for dance, have y'all had an opportunity to extend that in like a physical therapy type of program in terms of like injuries for people of all ages and overcoming things like chronic injuries?
Great question. We haven't, but it's certainly applicable to that, and I think you are welcome to translate that into that kind of methodology. Because I think it's all of those points have particular relevance for Parkinson's, but they're relevant to anyone doing rehabilitation for any kind of trauma or condition. And you know, we do have a number of physical therapists who come and do our workshop, who do the teacher training, even though they're not planning to teach, because the information is valuable to them and it's otherwise, unfortunately, not readily available. And you know whose fault that is? That's our fault as a dance community, that we haven't made our knowledge relevant and knowable for a wide range of people who could actually access it and use it. Now, a lot of physical therapists do come from dance backgrounds, have been dancers and have trained as dancers, but a lot of them haven't. They don't know how dancers think. And so we, as a dance community, have to do a better job of sharing what we know. So I hope we do that.
I know that people will have classes in other places and spaces soon, so just to, David, thank you so much. Nancy shared a film with me about Power from Parkinson's and the difference of being in a Parkinson's class for a week, just seeing participants dancing and being part of some of the things that David showed us today. And I think as we think about our own careers and places and spaces in the world and how we want to express our artistry and share our artistry and share that through we call education, but really in so many ways in advocacy and in sharing and in creating, this really opens up for us the kinds of ways that we can think about in the spaces that we can be in as artists, citizens in our world. So for all the students who are here, thank you so much for being here and taking this in. And come back. I have a comment.
If I could just make an announcement, we are always looking for volunteers for our Power for Parkinson's classes that are in Austin, and I always need volunteers in Georgetown for the Scott and White dance class that's taking place. So if you're ever interested, Tina knows how to get in. Professor Curran knows how to get in touch with me. So we would love to have you come observe the classes and also volunteer if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I just, for those of you who have been in pedagogy or who will be in pedagogy, Nancy Bain is one of our invaluable resources in the community of being able to go and watch dance classes with different populations in different places and spaces. And she's an incredible mentor and colleague, so I'm really grateful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David.